All men descend from a single common ancestor. Yet while some have risen to great heights, others have degenerated. What is the engine of this evolution and degeneration? And might science, from a study of the lower races, discern the future path for the higher races? To answer requires the obtention of a perfect skeleton, preferably a pair, male and female, from the oldest race on earth, Homo Tasmanicus. Such specimens are rarer now than whales, but their value is beyond price, and I am determined as a surgeon to procure them for the Royal College Museum. The nearest place to collect was the native graveyard at Oyster Cove, but those poor people there have great repugnance at any disturbance of the remains of their friends, and unfortunately, when their graves were opened, no skeletons complete with skulls could be found. I therefore made your request known to the Premier. He told me I could have the skeleton of Ponahoneen when she died. But when she died, he gave it instead to the Royal Society in Hobart. I extracted from the Premier his firm promise that the next skeleton would be mine. And when the next passed away, being the last remaining native male of his line, I had 4 constables instantly remove the body to the hospital, where, as a visiting surgeon, I had everything to hand required for the task. But the hospital's resident doctor, Mr. Stokel, stopping me in the street, informed me no person was permitted to examine the body. But the body was long ago promised to me, I replied. Stokel suggested then his view that the Royal Society has the best right. The Royal Society? I said. They're fools to try to keep it in a paltry place like Hobart. It ought to be sent to a place like London. Very well, I said, taking him into my trust. You see that he goes away all right, Dr. Stokel, and after he is buried, we can get him that way. Why don't you come to my house? Come to tea tonight. And I arranged my wife to engage Dr. Stokel that evening in conversation as long as she could. While I made my way to the hospital, and with the aid of my son and the hospital barber, removed the skull and replaced it with another. Unfortunately, the gatekeeper must have informed on us, for Stokel examined the body, and the skull, of course, swiveled about freely inside the skin until he felt the eye sockets at the back of the head. And so, purely to deny the Royal College of Surgeons the perfect skeleton, Stokel crudely severed both the feet and both hands and took them away. I therefore assembled a party of 6 to go to the graveyard to recover the skeleton, certain the hands and feet would then be returned to me. It was later put about to denigrate me. This absurd cartoon showing a struggle between the 2 parties at the graveside. But it is entirely false. For Stokel came before us, and when we uncovered the casket, it was empty. The next morning I followed a blood-splattered cart trail from the graveside to the place where Lanny's body had been quartered, the skeleton removed, and the remains, apart from a few small pieces of fat, disposed of I have no idea where. The trail led to the hospital. All this I caused to be published. But the guilty went free, and the innocent punished. I, whose motive was to advance science, found myself suspended from the hospital, the subject of virulent attack in the press, falsely accused, and on trial. But the case of a single man is nothing to the fate of his race. And I hold the key in the skull of the oldest specimen on Earth. The skull's measurement confirms to me all men do indeed descend from a single common ancestor. But also something extraordinary. Note first Lanny's ancestors. Now, look again at Lanny. The mental development is well marked when compared to his wild cousins. And the trunk and extremities will give evidence of much muscular power, a circumstance quite at variance with the history of his race. He exhibits to a most striking degree the improvement that can take place in the lower race when subjected to the effects of education and civilization. But what takes place in the higher races when they are subjected to the effects of a primitive environment? The antipodes. It must affect them. First, their physique, then the mental powers, and finally, their moral sense must slowly be overwhelmed. And does not every facet of colonial life demonstrate the degeneration? Knowing this, I would prefer to return to England, but to leave the colony now would be almost impossible for me. And so I remain William Crowther, surgeon. Hobart, November the 17th, 1869.